Rank isn't just metal on a collar. It's a layer of insulation. It's a wall you build brick by brick, year after year, until the man inside is completely hidden from the soldiers standing in front of him. They call it command presence. They teach it in schools. They grade you on it. You learn to keep your face still. You learn to keep your voice flat. You learn to lock the panic, the grief, and the doubt into a small box in the back of your mind. And you lose the key. Or at least you pretend to. They called him Iron Mike. That was the joke in the mess hall. Not to his face, of course. To his face it was, "Yes, General." "No, General." "Right away, General." But he knew the name. He earned it. He wore it like the ribbons on his chest. It meant he was reliable. It meant he didn't crack. It meant that when the world was burning down around them, he was the one thing that stood still. But the thing about iron is that it gets heavy. It gets cold. And if you wear it long enough, it starts to feel like it's fusing to your skin. This wasn't a combat deployment. That was the strange part. The war was over. The noise had stopped. And sometimes, the silence is louder than the mortar fire ever was. In the noise, you react, you move, you handle the problem. In the silence, you have to think. You have to remember. It was a Tuesday. A standard Tuesday in November. The air outside the hangar was biting. That dry, sharp cold that settles in your joints and reminds you of every jump, every hard landing, every night you slept on the ground. The unit was standing down. Deactivating. It's a polite military term for breaking up a family. These men and women had been through the grinder together. They had carried each other, and now they were being sent to the four winds. Reassigned, retired, forgotten. The general stood in his office looking at the mirror. The reflection looked right. The creases in the shirt were razor sharp. The metals were perfectly aligned, a colorful geometry of places that smelled like burning trash and fear. He looked like a poster. He looked like the man they needed him to be. He adjusted his tie. It felt tight, a little too tight against his throat. He swallowed, but the lump didn't go down. He walked out into the hallway. The sound of his boots on the linoleum was a rhythm he had known for 30 years. Click, click, click. Steady, unwavering. Every step pushed down the memories that were trying to surface. He wasn't thinking about the ceremony. He wasn't thinking about the speech folded in his pocket. The speech was good. It was written by a public affairs officer who knew all the right words. Duty, sacrifice, legacy, honor. It was a good speech. It was safe. It was the kind of speech that gets polite applause and lets everyone go home feeling resolved. But as he walked toward the hangar doors, he wasn't thinking about the words. He was thinking about a phone call from 3 years ago. He was thinking about a letter he had to write to a mother in Ohio. He was thinking about the way a C-130 looks on the tarmac when the ramp lowers and there is only a draped coffin inside, and the wind whips across the airfield, stinging your eyes. He stopped at the door. His aide, a young captain, opened it for him. "Ready, General?" the captain asked. He nodded. Just a short, sharp nod. Iron Mike. He stepped into the hangar. The command was given. Room, 10 hut. The sound was singular. 500 boots snapping together at once. It echoed off the steel rafters, a thunderclap of discipline. It was a sound he loved. It was the sound of order in a chaotic world. He walked to the podium. The walk felt long, longer than usual. The concrete floor felt hard under his feet, unforgiving. The air in the huge space was stale, smelling of oil, canvas, and that specific, unwashed scent of a battalion in formation. He climbed the steps to the stage. He stood behind the microphone. He looked out at them. Rows and rows of faces. That's the part civilians don't understand. They see a formation. They see a mass of green or tan. They see a unit. A general doesn't see a unit. Not really. Not if he's been there. He sees Miller, whose wife just left him. He sees Rodriguez, who walks with a slight limp when he thinks nobody is looking. He sees the new kid, the one who looks 12 years old, trying so hard not to shake. And he sees the gaps. That was the hardest part. The spaces where men should be standing. The formation was perfect. The spacing was regulation. But he saw the holes. He saw the ghosts standing in the ranks. The silence in the hangar was absolute. 500 people holding their breath, waiting for the old man to speak, waiting for the wisdom, waiting for the order. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the speech. The paper felt thin, fragile. He placed it on the podium. He smoothed it out with a hand that didn't tremble. Not yet. "Troops," he started. His voice was strong, deep. It filled the room. The microphone amplified the gravel in his tone. Distinguished guests, families. He looked down at the paper. The words swam for a second. Today we mark the end of a chapter. It felt wrong. The phrase tasted like ash in his mouth. A chapter? Is that what this was? A story in a book? Something you read and then turn the page? He looked up again. He locked eyes with a sergeant in the front row. A sergeant with weary eyes and a face that looked 10 years older than his birth certificate said. The sergeant wasn't looking at the general's stars. He was looking at the general's eyes. There was a question in that look. A quiet, burning question that every veteran knows. Was it worth it? The general felt the armor tighten. The iron suit he had worn for 3 decades felt like it was shrinking, crushing his ribs. He looked back at the paper. Your service has been exemplary. The nation owes you a debt. Standard, safe, clean. The air in the hangar felt heavy, thicker than it should be. It pressed against his chest. He could hear the hum of the lights overhead, a low electric buzz that seemed to drill into his skull. He realized he had been silent for too long. The pause was stretching. It was moving from a dramatic pause into something else, something uncomfortable. He saw the age shift nervously in his peripheral vision. He tried to read the next line. We carry the torch of freedom. He couldn't say it. He physically could not force the words out of his throat. They felt like lies, not because they weren't true in the abstract, but because they weren't true here. Not in this room. Not with these men. These men didn't care about torches. They cared that their knees hurt. They cared that they couldn't sleep without the TV on. They cared that they had done things, seen things, that couldn't be explained in a press release. And he was their father. That's what a commander is. You are the father. You are responsible. When they die, it's on your ledger. When they break, it's on your watch. He looked at the speech again. He looked at the neat, typed letters. Then, he did something Iron Mike never did. He folded the paper. He folded it once, then twice. The crinkle of the paper was loud in the microphone. He put it back in his pocket. The aide took a half step forward, panic in his eyes. The general waved him off with a small motion of his hand. He gripped the sides of the podium. His knuckles were white. He leaned in close to the mic. I had a speech, he said. His voice was different now, softer. The gravel was still there, but the volume was gone. It was conversational. I had a speech about glory and about history. He paused. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had signed the orders, the hands that had written the letters. But I can't read it to you. The silence in the room changed. It went from the silence of discipline to the silence of confusion, then to the silence of attention, real attention, the kind you give when you know something is happening that isn't in the script. I look at you, he said, scanning the rows, and I don't see a battalion. I don't see numbers. He took a breath, a shaky, shallow breath. I see the mud, he whispered. The microphone picked it up. I see the rain in the valley. I see the way the dust looked when the convoy came in. He was off script. He was off the map. He was walking out into a minefield without a detector. I see the cost, he said. I see the cost. He felt the burning start behind his eyes. It was a physical pain, a sharp, stinging pressure. He fought it. He clamped his jaw shut. He was a general. Generals don't do this. Generals are statues. Generals are granite. But the face of the sergeant in the front row hadn't changed. He was still watching, waiting. The general felt the memory of a specific night, the radio chatter, the static, the voice calling for a medic, the voice that cut out. He remembered the silence that followed that radio call, that specific, terrible silence that means someone is gone. He felt that silence filling the hangar now. They tell you, he said, his voice cracking just a fraction, a hairline fracture in the stone, that it gets easier. They tell you that you put it away, that you hang up the uniform and you walk away. He shook his head slowly. They lie. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. He let go of the podium. He stood up straight. He wasn't hiding behind the wood anymore. He was just a man in a suit of clothes that felt too heavy, standing in front of 500 other men who were carrying the exact same weight. I have carried you, he said, every single day. I have carried you. He wasn't talking about leadership anymore. He was talking about the ghosts. He looked at the empty space in the second row, where a squad leader should have been. He looked at the gap in the third platoon. The pressure in his chest was unbearable. It was a dam holding back a river of 3 decades. It was the grief of every letter, every flag, every salute held for 3 seconds too long over a grave. He tried to swallow the lump again. It wouldn't move. He looked down at his boots. He blinked, trying to clear the blur. But the blur wasn't going away. He looked up. He wanted to tell them he was proud. He wanted to tell them he loved them. That's a word you can't use in the army. Love. But it's the only word that fits. You don't fight for a flag. You fight for the man next to you. You die for the man next to you. He wanted to say that. But the words were stuck behind the wall of iron. And then, the wall cracked. It didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It just gave way. His lip trembled. Just once. A small, uncontrollable spasm. He closed his eyes. It wasn't a sob. It was quieter than that. It was just a single drop of water that refused to stay where it belonged. It spilled over the edge of his eyelid, hot and humiliating, and cut a path down the weathered skin of his cheek. He felt it. He felt the exact moment gravity won. For a second he panicked. The training kicked in. Lock it down. Secure the perimeter. Maintain bearing. But the command codes were not working. The manual override was broken. He raised a hand to wipe it away, but his hand stopped mid-air. If he wiped it, he was hiding. If he wiped it, he was pretending it wasn't there. And he was done pretending, so he let it fall. It hit the collar of his uniform, a tiny dark spot on the pristine fabric. Then came the second one. The silence in the hangar shifted again. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a church. It was a sacred, terrifying quiet. 500 soldiers stood at attention. They watched the man who had sent them into hell. They watched the man who had signed the letters to their families. They watched the man who never blinked. And they saw him breaking. He gripped the podium so hard the wood creaked. He needed it to hold him up because his knees felt like water. "I didn't bring them all back," he whispered. He wasn't talking to the microphone. He was talking to the floor. But the acoustics carried it. "I didn't bring them all back." He looked up. The blur in his vision was bad now. The faces were just shapes, but he knew they were there. "I have medals," he said, his voice gaining a jagged, tearing edge. "I have a chest full of ribbons. They tell me I'm a hero. They tell me I did my job." He unpinned the silver star from his chest. His fingers fumbled, losing their dexterity. The medal came free. He held it up. It caught the harsh overhead light. "This doesn't weigh anything," he said. "It's just brass. It's light." He set it down on the wood. Clink. "The ones I left behind," he said, and his voice broke completely, fracturing into pieces. "They are the heavy ones. They are the weight. And I cannot put them down." He stopped. He couldn't breathe. The air in the hangar was gone. He felt like he was back in the mountains at 10,000 feet, gasping for oxygen that wasn't there. He waited for the judgment. He waited for them to look away in embarrassment. He waited for the loss of respect. A general doesn't cry. A general leads. But nobody looked away. The sergeant in the front row, the one with the old eyes, broke the position of attention. It wasn't a protest. It was a reaction. The sergeant took one step forward, just one. Then he stopped. He looked at the general, and he didn't salute. He nodded. It was a slow, deep nod. A motion that said, "I know." It said, "You are carrying it. We are carrying it too." Then the soldier next to him moved. A slight shift, a relaxing of the shoulders. A ripple went through the formation. It wasn't a breakdown of discipline. It was a sudden, collective exhale. It was 500 people realizing they didn't have to hold their breath anymore. The general looked at them, really looked at them. He saw tears on the face of a captain in the third row. He saw a corporal biting his lip until it turned white. He realized then that the iron wall hadn't been protecting them from him. It had been keeping him from them. He had been standing alone on an island of command, thinking he had to be strong for everyone else while they were all drowning in the same water. He took a deep breath. It rattled in his lungs. "Dismissed," he whispered. It wasn't the standard shout. It wasn't the bark of a drill sergeant. It was an invitation. "Dismissed," he said again, louder. The formation didn't break immediately. They didn't run for the doors. They stayed. For a long moment, nobody moved. They just stood there witnessing the truth of it. The truth that the war doesn't end when you get on the plane. The truth that the rank doesn't save you from the nightmares. Then slowly, the sergeant in the front turned. He didn't walk away. He turned to the man next to him and put a hand on his shoulder. The general stepped back from the podium. He left the speech on the wood. He left the medal next to it. He walked down the steps. He didn't walk to the exit. He walked toward the troops. He walked up to the sergeant. The sergeant snapped to attention out of habit. The general reached out and took the sergeant's hand. He didn't shake it. He held it. "Thank you," the general said. "Sir," the sergeant replied. His voice was thick. "We got you, sir. We got you." 3 words. They hit harder than any bullet. The general nodded. He turned and walked through the ranks. He walked through the middle of the formation. He looked at their faces. He didn't hide his own. He let them see the red eyes. He let them see the wet tracks on his cheeks. He was telling them without words that it was okay. That if Iron Mike could break, then they could break too. That they didn't have to be stone. They just had to be alive. He walked all the way to the back of the hangar. The sound of his boots was different now. It wasn't the rhythmic click of a machine. It was the walk of a man. He pushed open the small personnel door at the back. The cold air hit him again. It was still November. It was still freezing. But the crushing weight on his chest was different. It wasn't gone. It would never be gone. The ghosts were still there. The names were still etched on the inside of his eyelids. But the box was open. The lock was broken. He walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat. The silence of the car felt different than the silence of the office. It felt empty, but clean. He looked in the rearview mirror. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen too much and carried it too far. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't hate the reflection. He put the car in gear. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need the noise to drown anything out. He just drove. He drove past the guard shack. The young MP saluted sharply. The general returned the salute, but he held it for a second longer than regulation. A moment of connection. "I see you," the gesture said. "I see you standing watch." He drove out the gate and turned onto the highway. The road stretched out in front of him, a long gray ribbon disappearing into the winter sky. He wasn't sure where he was going. He wasn't sure what he would do tomorrow. The uniform would come off. The stars would go in a box. But for today, he was still here. He took a breath. He let it out slowly. He was still here. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't to charge a hill. It's to let the armor fall. It's to admit that the war came home with you. If you are carrying something heavy today, if you are holding up a wall so nobody sees the cracks, you don't have to do it alone. Respect to those who stayed, respect to those who came back, and eternal honor to the ones who are still waiting for the order to come home. I see you. We see you. Stand watch.